It's the last day of February, March, one day away, the greatest month of the year, and we are ready to talk bracketology as we inch even closer to the reveal of the field of 68 here, just about 10 days away. Paul Fritschner, Rocco Miller, and Andy Bottom's back with you. Andy, it's great to have you back here on the show. How you doing? And welcome to Fielding the 68, presented by Rhythm.
Yeah, I'm happy to be on, pinch hitting for Brad and Lucas, but have certainly missed being on the show, but haven't missed one. You guys have been doing a great job, so glad to be back in the mix for at least for a day.
The fellas are back. Rocco, we were joking before he came on. You know, we kind of play the Where's Waldo game, right? Where in the world is Rocco Miller? And for now, you're home, right?
I'm home. Yeah, here for the weekend. We've got a big one tomorrow, Paul and Andy. Great to be back on with you. Gonzaga coming to town to play San Francisco. There's a lot on the line for the double bye, so had to be in town for that one tomorrow night. It's going to be played at the NBA's Chase Center. A lot of that money goes to NIL for the San Francisco Dons, so I know a lot of people are frustrated that this game's not on San Francisco's campus, but it will be a star-studded event. The Dons just got a big road win. We'll talk about them in a little bit.
Yeah. All right. Let's get into it, guys, because there's a ton to get to from this week. And we're going to start with the biggest winner of the last 5 days since we had the last Fielding the 68 on Monday. And, you know, you look at everything that's happened this week, especially Wednesday night. I feel like on Wednesday night, I had the YouTube TV quad box on the iPad. I had a game on the TV. I had the laptop open, and you're going from game to game to game. And there was bubble game after bubble game after result after result. And a lot of things have shifted in the last few days. So, Rocco, who to you was your biggest winners of the week?
I have to start with Vanderbilt, Paul, because Vanderbilt was a team that their resume, and a lot of these bubble teams in general, they're all missing something, at least one thing. A lot of these bubble teams are missing multiple things. But the big thing Vanderbilt needed was a road win against the field. Their best road win was LSU. They also had a road win at Virginia Tech that did not age very well. It's still in quad 3 as we speak. So for them to go to Texas A&M and get the big road win, not only just any road win against the field, but a road win against a team that was in the top 10 of our seed list was absolutely massive. And now we're in a situation with 3 games to go on the SEC schedule where the Commodores – they probably need to win at least one of those 3, but they're in such a great position versus where they were on Monday. I don't think there's anybody that came close to as good of a week as them just because they got exactly what their resume called for in that game. I think the other team I'll shout out, just hinted at earlier, Gonzaga, they've leaked a lot of oil this year. They've been extremely dominant in their wins, and this week was no different. They went to Santa Clara and avenged one of their losses, winning by 19 on the road. I think that was just really big for them basketball-wise. Obviously important for them not to slip all the way onto the bubble. They've been teetering with the resume and all of that. So they pick up a quad 1 road win. Not only that, but they win by 19. They discover a new 7-footer who was their third-string center. I mean, Gonzaga, we have to remember, still has an embarrassment of riches on that roster, and they showed it on Tuesday. So Gonzaga didn't move seed lines for me. They moved up a couple spots, still a 9 seed, but I think they're a lot more secure than they were on Monday.
Well, that was what I was going to ask, because if you look at what Gonzaga has done this year, of course, they have the win over Baylor. They have the win over Indiana. They have the win over Arizona State. But all 3 of those games that I listed came back in November. And I know the whole season counts, right? You're not talking about last 5, last 10, all of that. But Gonzaga got swept by St. Mary's. They lost to Santa Clara. They lost to Oregon State. And I think a lot of people maybe were getting swept up in, is Gonzaga going to slip all the way out of this field? Are they going to maybe not slip all the way out? Are they going to end up in Dayton? What's Dayton going to look like this year? Is Gonzaga, do you think, are they in danger of that anymore? Or do you think that this win this week guarantees that they're going to be in? Or are they locked in your field?
I would never call anybody a lock. Maybe the 1 seeds we could now, but that's a bad word where I come from, Paul. So, we live in a world where there could be 11 bid steals in the 11 conferences where there's potentially at-larges, right? So you never want to say the word lock. That's just where I sit. But Gonzaga, they've also gotten a little bit of help. A team like Indiana is coming out of nowhere. They beat them on a neutral court at the start of the year. So they actually have a couple wins now that they probably weren't banking on earlier in the process. And you look at their road work, like if you're going to be in a bubble discussion, it's all about what you did away from home. And they're 9-6 in games away from the kennel. They're 3-2 in their biggest 5 road games away from the kennel. Those are the top 2 quad road games. So again, there's some of those resume areas that are really critical that Gonzaga's just fine in. And obviously they're a top 10 team in the metrics, the power metrics. They're number 8 in the net. So I feel very good about their chances to certainly avoid Dayton and the bubble in general. But here's the situation in the WCC, Paul. If Gonzaga loses to San Francisco tomorrow, they'll be the number 3 seed for the first time since the semifinal final format of the WCC started in 2003. Now, there was a little bit of a hiatus in there, but not to go down that rabbit hole too far. This would be an unprecedented situation where Gonzaga would actually have to play on Sunday and win 3 games to win the WCC tournament. So again, you always have to look at the worst case scenario when you're talking about locks, when you're talking about anything else, about just a secure spot. So they could theoretically lose tomorrow and lose a game to like a Washington State or an LMU in Vegas, and they certainly don't want to do that.
Yep. Andy, your biggest winner and your biggest loser from this week?
Yeah, when you look at winners, Rocco took a couple of the ones that I had listed. I think you look at the SEC bubble and Georgia beating Florida, almost blowing a massive lead, but holding on at the end. Good to get them back in the conversation. Whether that pushes them to the right side of the cut line or not is probably a different conversation, but at least, kept them in the mix. And Arkansas, staving off a pretty big game from Trey Johnson in Texas, to be able to win that one, I think were huge. And then Boise State in the Mountain West beating Utah State. They were, I know, on Monday's show, in for some, out for others. That really kept them in the picture there. So those, from a winner's perspective, I think were the 3 around the bubble that benefited the most. If you look at losers, the Arkansas-Texas game was somebody's not going to feel good about this one. It's really going to hurt their positioning, and Texas was the loser in that one. Wake Forest losing at home to Virginia, now have lost 3 of their last 4, with oddly enough, the only win in there coming at SMU, which is, I'm not sure if that's more of an indictment of SMU or not at this point, but regardless, Wake has really hurt themselves here down the stretch and lost some games they really couldn't afford to lose. And then Oklahoma, crushing loss to Kentucky at home. Again, as you kind of look at that SEC bubble, you had a couple winners, a couple losers across that part of the bracket.
Rocco, looking at that Wake loss from earlier this week, I think for as much attention as we've given Wake on the show this year, how much of a loss like that, how much does that really hurt where they are right now?
Well, I think it hurts because it's a 3rd loss in the last month, and whether it was in the last month or not is irrelevant, but it's really leaving a sour taste, I think, lately. The 3rd subpar loss, they lost at home to Florida State. They lost at NC State. Now they take the home Virginia loss. So when you're looking at the bubble, some of these teams have 1 bad loss, maybe 2 bad losses, but now you got a team in here with 3, and it just makes it really hard to want to make a case for them, right? Like all these bubble teams have problems, or they wouldn't be on the bubble, but certain ones are a little easier to make a case for than others. And I think this is where you heard me say this about other teams in the past. The bad can start outweighing the good. And really, the good about Wake Forest is they're 8-6 away from home, but a lot of those wins are, because the ACC is so down, a lot of them fall in quad 3. They have SMU, Stanford, and California as road wins that fall in the top 1 or 2 quads, and they're 3-5 in that area. So it's still not a 500 record there, and their only win against the actual field, most likely, unless you put SMU in, is the win over Michigan, and it was down the street in Greensboro. So,
yeah,
it's a tough one. It's a tough sell. It's a tough sell, and I just couldn't find it in me to keep Wake Forest in today. Anybody
else losers from your side of the week?
Yeah, definitely. I think more towards the top of the board, Iowa State. I didn't think it was that horrible to lose on the road to Oklahoma State, but It really kind of messed up some of their numbers that they had going for them. And also part of Iowa State's story, throughout the process has been the status of Milan Momcilovic. And Milan played. So now that excuse kind of goes out the window, right? So I think for Iowa State, twofold. One, taking the loss, but two, the fact that he played. I think they're starting to show that maybe they're not as good as we once thought. And they're losing out on some comparisons that they were winning before. And I was a little surprised, but they fell to a number 4 seed for me. They're still the strongest of the 4 seeds. But a real big warning sign there. They get swept on the road trip. Of course, no harm in losing at Houston. I actually thought they played fairly well in the Houston loss. Just to be able to lose by single digits there, it takes a lot of work. But yeah, tough one for the Cyclones. And then I also add Maryland, mainly just because they lose on a miracle shot to Michigan State at home. But at the end of the day, in bracketology, that's a home loss. And Maryland was trending up and up and up, looking really, really good. And they were right there to win that game. A lot of things could have broke differently and they get the win. They would have been threatening for a protected seed, but instead of going up, they go down and they fall down to a 6 seed. So I just think somewhat that's a bad break. Maryland's still just as good as we thought. We'll see how they respond from a loss like that in their next outing.
Let's look at the top line here. Let's look at the 1 seeds. And when you see this Houston team and what they were able to do in a 72-hour stretch last week, as you see the top 4 seeds right now as we have them on fielding the 68. You have Auburn, Duke, Alabama, and Houston. But last weekend, Houston, they play Iowa State at home. They get that win, and then they turn around on Monday. They go to Texas Tech. They win that game as well. Still just 1 loss for Houston since they started 4-3 this year. Only 1 loss since November 30th. They slide up onto the 1 line. Andy, what an impressive performance over the last week for Houston, showing why they deserve to be up here on the 1 line.
Yeah, it really has been. And they've been a team that since really since early in the season, the quality metrics have been great. And you're just waiting to see, would the resume ones come around to be able to kind of back up what it looks like from a predictive standpoint. And now they're up to 4th, I believe, in the average resume metrics, and that definitely has happened. They're perfect 9-0 on the road. And yeah, people could point to the fact that Iowa State was missing some players in that game on Saturday, Texas Tech missing guys on Monday night. But I think the overall accomplishment that Houston has put together, 4-0 since the reveal, 3 of those coming on the road against the Arizona schools and Texas Tech, and then beating Iowa State at home. Again, it's just kind of brought the resume metrics in line and the overall resume in line with what the predictives tell you. And for them, that was enough to vault past a Florida who lost at home to Georgia and have since kind of passed Tennessee. As you look at that, I think it's still relatively close. They've got Houston has 7 Quad 1 wins, 4 in Quad 1A. And Tennessee has 9 Quad 1 wins, 6 in Quad 1A. So while Tennessee may lag them a little bit in the quality metrics, they're pretty close with them on the resume side. And Tennessee's remaining schedule makes it, they have a chance to put together a pretty compelling argument if they're able to run through those. And Houston has some tough games left as well. They got Kansas at home and they finish at Baylor. So, but I think overall, as you look at what they've done since that committee reveal, they've really rocketed up because they've just been able to bank so many quality wins since then to really give them the ability to leap over everybody else. And that 9-0 road record is pretty tough to beat. As Rocco talked about the importance of road victories a little bit earlier, like 9-0, while they didn't perform well in their neutral site games or as well in their neutral site games, the 9-0, including being able to be undefeated, at least at this point in Big 12 play away from home is huge.
This top line is historically good, Rocco, isn't it?
So far, we haven't seen the final product, though, Paul. A lot of teams take a weird loss or two at the end of the season almost every year, so we'll see. But it's trending that way. I thought going into the week and at the end of last week included, we've had 6 number 1 seeds. I think the biggest issue has been that we only have 4 regions. So that's not any of these teams' fault. And so, they're all worthy. And even Florida, to a degree, even though they lost at Georgia, still has, a very defensible 1 seed case. They have the best win in the country at Auburn. Nobody else has that win. And they've only lost 4 games all in for the year. And they perform like a top 4 to 5 team. So they're very, very much right in the thick of it themselves, despite the loss. But again, I would agree with Andy, that 9-0 road record for Houston. All 9 of those wins are in the top 2A in quads, 5 of them in quad 1. So they're not easy buildings to win in. Obviously, the travel in the Big 12 is pretty extreme. Doesn't matter where they go. They're finding ways to get the W's. And, so I feel like they've earned it for the road damage. I think if there is any knock on Houston at all, it's just the fact that they didn't beat anybody better than Notre Dame in non-conference. So they've been able to build an entire resume for the most part within their league. And sometimes that gets scorned upon by the committee. But beyond that, like they're clearly quite dominant. And I feel like in recent years, the committee's been a little bit more dependent on your Ken Palm models. Now they have Torvik to use, they have the net, and Houston's going to win all those comparisons when they look at those.
So Florida, on the flip side, they had been kind of rolling here, to say the least, through February, where you're looking at wins over Auburn on the road. They had, wins over Mississippi State. They'd beaten Vanderbilt since that loss to Tennessee. But then all of a sudden they dig themselves in a huge hole against Georgia. They dig themselves out of it, but they can't finish the job, and Georgia gets the win in Athens. How far does Florida fall because of this, Rocco? Does that really knock them out of reach, or where does Florida sit right now?
Yeah, they did end up falling to 6th in the pecking order, but I still, like I said, believe they have what I would consider a 1-seed worthy resume, but they're just the 6th best option now, much like Tennessee was on Monday. So everybody just bumped up a spot. I actually had Florida 3rd overall on Monday. So that's how close these teams are. For them to take one loss, not a bad loss at all. Losing at Georgia is a hard place to win. Kentucky lost there. Oklahoma and others have lost there. So that's a tough building to win in. But that was just enough to create some separation. And it's still not a lot of separation. They're still 7-2 in quad 1 and 2 road games are the Gators. 6-3 and 11-3 away from Gainesville. They have a lot of the things you're looking for a 1 seed, headlined by the win at Auburn, winning that game by 9. I think we all watched it. We saw what kind of ceiling these Gators have. And I think also the Georgia loss showed us a lot about this team too. They got down in a big hole. They didn't flinch. They came all the way back, took the lead, and then Georgia stepped up in the last minute to win it. But I think Florida's still sitting there. If they can turn it around, they have a big home game with Texas A&M tomorrow. College game day will be there. Everybody's fired up, so they can get right back in the mix with a win tomorrow.
And then, Andy, just your thoughts on Florida here before we go to break.
Yeah, with Florida, they're right there, as Rocco said. You've got these 6 teams, and for as much as we can lament how bad the bubble is, the top is really, really good. And I think in most years, if you looked at a team that has a resume like what Florida's looks like right now, them being the second 2 seed in a lot of cases would be pretty hard to fathom. They've done really well. They're 5th in the average resume metrics, 4th in average quality metrics. As Rocco said, they're 11-13 away from home. And the only slip up they've had since the reveal was that game against Georgia. So, the good news for them, because one of the areas, I guess, if you want to point out a place they're lacking, they only have 5 Q1 wins right now, even though 4 of those fall in Q1A. They've got Texas A&M, at Alabama, and Ole Miss down the stretch as their 3 closing games. So really a chance to bolster that part of their resume and potentially get their way back onto the 1 line. They're definitely not out of contention for a 1 seed at all. And the margins, as Rocco said, between some of these teams at the back end of the 1, beginning of the 2 line are really, really slim.
All right, fellas, we've talked about the top. Now we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the bubble. The last 4 in, first 4 out. Where is your team sitting right now? Because we know a lot of you watching are tuned in to find out if your team's going to make the NCAA tournament. We are going to talk about all that on the other side of this break. This is Fielding the 68, presented by Rhythm.
College basketball fans, are you ready to take your hoops game to a new level? Whether you're a seasoned bettor or just trying to win your March Madness office pool, Rhythm is here to give you the edge this season. With data-driven predictions for every single college basketball game left on the schedule, Rhythm helps you maximize your bets. And as March Madness kicks off, Rhythm's insights will help you spot those plucky Cinderellas that you know are going to shake up the NCAA tournament. But that's not all. When Selection Sunday rolls around, let Rhythm's AI-powered bracket generator do the heavy lifting for you. This is the same AI tool that performed 35% better than the average ESPN bracket last year. And here's the best part. Rhythm pairs perfectly with our Field of 68 expert analysis, giving you the 1-2 punch that you need for the rest of the college basketball season. So don't wait. Download Rhythm today and get ready to see college basketball and your betting results in a whole new light.
Welcome back to Fielding the 68, presented by Rhythm. Whether you're a seasoned bettor or aiming to dominate your college basketball betting, March Madness pool, NBA golf, and more, Rhythm gives you the competitive edge. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. All right, let's talk about the bubble. And Rocco, this is all on you here to give your last four in and who you feel like is just teetering on the edge of being in the NCAA tournament right now as we head into a jam-packed Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Well, it really is a complete bubble at this juncture, Paul, because I would argue there's 14 to 16 teams still fighting for maybe 5 spots. And so it's really like changing almost every day based on, what you like and what you think is going to happen later. You can look at it both ways. The way we do it here on Fielding the 68 is based on what's already been deposited in the bank. So we're trying not to look ahead too far, but Indiana and Xavier will remain in from Monday. Of course, Indiana held on to beat Penn State. Xavier, I don't think has played. So they're going to be in for the reasons we talked about on Monday, but still really, really hard to pick both of those teams, honestly. Boise State gets in for me. I just had to talk myself into it. I have my concerns about the Broncos just based on the way the last few committees have treated the Mountain West. I have good information that last year New Mexico would not have gotten in, and I thought that New Mexico team was much better than this Boise State team, but no year is the same as the year before, so you just got to take it for 1 year at a time. They do have 4 wins now against the field, beating Utah State in convincing fashion. They had a great February. They also lost by 11 to San Francisco, who they are battling for one of these bubble spots. So that's another interesting result from earlier in the year, but that game was at USF. And my last team in is SMU. This is, again, we landed here, I think, a couple Fridays ago. Maybe it was last Friday. And my case for SMU is something that kind of blows my mind a little bit, but they're 10-2 away from Dallas. And in those 10 wins, 9 of those wins have come in different time zones than their own time zone. They had 1 win against LSU in Frisco, Texas. Outside of that, they've won all their games in either the West Coast or the East Coast because they're misplaced in this ACC league. And, I think at some point these wins have to mean something. And they're sitting right there if you want to pick them. Again, I'm not sold on the fact that they've had all these home opportunities. Of course, last Saturday, lost to Clemson earlier in the month, lost to Wake Forest at home. There's certainly a lot to not like about SMU. So I'm not arguing that. But at the same time, what we hear from the committee every year is who did you play? Where did you play? How'd you do? SMU is one of the only options out there that has winning marks away from home. And a lot of those wins, they've played 6 games on the road that are top 2 quads, and they're 4-2. And I think the kicker here is the chairman of the committee. We all know who that is, the ACC's finest, Bubba Cunningham. And I just think between SMU, Wake Forest, and North Carolina, one of them is going to get in. So I'm saving a spot for that league, and I might be dead wrong, but I was right last year about Virginia. And it wasn't pretty to talk about, and I didn't create a lot of new fans picking Virginia, but I was right. So we're going with SMU for today for that last spot.
That's right, Rocco. That's why you're on this show. That's why you're doing this, Rocco. Stand by it, Virginia.
It's Andy. It's one of those junctures where it's hard to defend, but SMU, you can take them right now.
It's all right. Rip the Band-Aid off. Andy, what do you think about those 4 teams that we just saw on the screen?
I'll be very curious to know who the consensus had, because I know that there are times when Rocco has been the outlier in some of these, but to his point, the Virginia pick was a good one from a bracketology and prediction standpoint. It was not a good one to watch once they made it, and it was not one that you were ultimately vindicated by the way that they played in the actual tournament. But that's not the exercise here.
Rocco doesn't have to worry about that. Rocco's just worried about getting them in, and then once it happens,
yeah, absolutely. You don't have to. You don't have to justify their performance.
My hands are clean
once they get in. So, absolutely. So I think of the two that I'd be most in line with of those would be Indiana, which as somebody who follows the program and does a podcast about them closely would have been hard to fathom. And I think there's reasons that you could look at them now and say that they maybe still don't belong. But the resume average is pretty good. The quality metrics based on some of the blowout losses early in the year have really taken a hit. And winning at Michigan State is carrying a lot of weight. Beating Purdue at home is carrying a lot of weight. They avoided disaster against Penn State this week and now have to go on the road to the Pacific Northwest. So I think a split there and everybody would feel pretty good about it heading into that final with Ohio State, which is going to shape up to be pretty important for both teams. And then Boise is the other one that of those I'd be most apt to have in. They're a little bit the opposite of IU, where the quality metrics are a bit better than the resume metrics. But I think you look at some of what they've done, especially lately, and you can make an argument to have them in. Beating Clemson in the non-conference is key there as well. And so they're kind of in avoid disaster mode in these next couple, where they go to Fresno and they go to Air Force before taking on Colorado State at home. And then you get to Xavier and SMU. Xavier, another one of these teams with one quad one win, and you're just trying to. And while that's a great win at Marquette, you're just trying to figure out other I guess reasons or other quality wins to really push them into the field. Huge one at the Cintas Center tomorrow when Creighton comes in. That gives them a chance at another quality win. They've got a game at Butler that would be another top two quadrant win. And then they finish up with Providence. So to me, I'd probably have them out with some work to do. And then SMU is probably the one I would disagree with the most. I think the rationale of another ACC team finding a way to get in, I think is valid. But for them, it just gets tough where, again, you guys have talked about this so much on here during the season and done a great job in covering the challenges with them of, they haven't shown up in most of their tough, the biggest chances to prove themselves, they really haven't shown up. And so is it enough that they've been able to do what they've done in those other games? Maybe. And I think looking at them from a road neutral perspective, 10-2 is important. And so they've just got to kind of keep winning. They don't have anything. Everything they have left is only going to hurt them at this point. And so that's usually, particularly as a fan, that's not a great spot to be in, where all you're thinking about is don't screw up. And maybe that's all you're thinking about. Hopefully that's not all you're thinking about as a player, of the don't screw up as you go to Stanford, you host Syracuse, and you finish at Florida State. But that's the position they've put themselves in at this point. And so I think, we'll continue to learn more about them, but they're a team to really watch once the ACC tournament hits. And you got to hope the draw falls right, where they get a chance to really knock off either one of the other bubble teams from the league or one of the teams that's already a lock to be in.
Every year we talk about the bubble teams and maybe whether it's a weak bubble or a strong bubble or whatever you want to call it. And this year, the narrative has definitely been that this bubble is particularly weak. I see the chat talking about it. I see it on social media, Twitter, everywhere, that this bubble stinks this year. It's terrible. We can't expand the tournament because what are we talking about with these teams that are sitting on the bubble right now? I have a question for you guys. Either one of you can take it if you feel strongly about it. Is this bubble this year particularly weak, or is it just that these are the teams on the bubble and that's why it is what it is?
It feels to me that it is weak. I don't know, though, whether this is going to be what we should come to expect as you get into some of these bigger leagues, as teams have been added. This might be normal as we go forward. The SEC has been great, and teams have just beaten up one another to a point where you have all these teams that have a ton of losses. So it's hard to really know. It certainly feels that way as I go through the exercise and try to bracket and look at teams. But it's a little bit hard to disassociate that from whether this is really what we are going to have going forward. I mean, there's so many teams as I got down kind of prepping for the show. I just kept writing this team 17-11, next team 17-11, another team 17-11, 16-12. You just have a lot more in that range. But as you get to these leagues, it's probably likely that if you're not at the top of those, you're going to have the middle to the lower middle of it beat up on each other. They're going to accrue a ton of losses, and then you've got to sort it out from there. So I'm hesitant to pass judgment as this is. I won't make grandiose statements like this is the weakest bubble we've ever seen or things like that until we get maybe another couple years into the current conference structure. But it doesn't feel great, and it's a lot easier, as it always is, I feel like, to find reasons to keep teams out than it is to put them in. And this group of teams is no different in that regard.
Okay, let's take a look now at the consensus last four in. And you have Boise State, Indiana, Andy, speaking of you, Baylor, and Georgia as the last four in. Baylor, a name that sticks out there. Who'd have thought over the last few weeks we'd see Baylor now at 16-12 fall all the way down into fielding the 68's last four in. The Bears trying to shore things up here and make sure they get a bid. Rocco, what stands out to you from this group of four?
Well, I think, it covered a little bit of it. I think with Baylor and Georgia, I'll talk about them in my first four out. I don't have either of them in, and probably obvious reasons. In meaningful games, they're both 2 games under 500. Again, that's been a historical precedent where there is no evidence of a team struggling in meaning. And when I say meaningful games, once again, for review, it's just removing the quad 4 results. There's no precedent for a team getting in with that. Now, Baylor plays Oklahoma State tomorrow. They win that. They're probably back in on Monday. But again, they don't have Josh Ojimuna anymore. They're 1-4 without him. The committee's going to talk about that. Their one win is a home overtime win against West Virginia. They've lost at Cincinnati. They've lost at Colorado, 2 non-tournament teams. And so there's multiple reasons to keep from where I'm sitting. And then with Georgia, they're a road win short. They only have one all year at Georgia Tech. That's not getting you in. And they, like Andy said, I agree. They had a great week. They did something to get themselves back in the mix. They're close now, but they got to get another road win. There's no precedent for a team with less than 2 road wins getting selected. So again, the way the exercise goes, where I'm sitting, is what you have in the bank so far. You can't count money that's not in the bank yet. Now, teams like Georgia and Baylor have great paths to get in. Even a team like Texas has a path to get in, or Ohio State has a path to get in. But right now, based on what we know, there's no reason to put them in.
Rocco, will stay with you for the first 4 out.
Yeah, so I talked about Baylor and Georgia. That was, kind of getting ahead of myself. But San Francisco, they're right there, in my opinion. I struggled with them mainly because they have the big win over St. Mary's, but it was at home. St. Mary's only lost once all year in the WCC. It was to this San Francisco team. They scheduled well. They don't have a bad loss at all. They have a Boise State who's also on the bubble by 11 points. They got the road win they absolutely had to have at Oregon State on Wednesday night. And Oregon State's a team that won every single home game except for the game against Oregon and St. Mary's, 2 teams that are in the top 6 seed lines. Oregon State beat Gonzaga at home. They beat other good teams at home. So I think if the committee gets into the weeds, obviously Stu Jackson, the WCC committee, is on the committee, banking on that a little bit. I think there will be a big fight to try to get a third WCC team in if this were the situation. Now, let's be honest. San Francisco plays Gonzaga tomorrow. They absolutely will need to beat them at least once. The winner of that game, as we said, will get the 2 seed and a bye all the way to Monday night, 2 Mondays from now, the semifinals of the tournament. And if San Francisco gets in that position, they'll be 2 wins away from an auto bid. So we'll see. I think if they lose tomorrow, the path gets a lot harder. Obviously, they'll have to play Sunday instead of Monday and then play Gonzaga on really no rest. in that next scenario. So a lot to be determined. And then George Mason, we talked about them quite a bit on Monday. I wasn't on the show, so I'll talk about George Mason now. They do have 4 road wins in the top 2 quads, 1 quad 1 road win at Dayton. Obviously been very good in the Atlantic 10. I think that's where the majority of the resume was built, though, and I think that's part of the George Mason problem. They also had a unfortunate buzzer-beating loss to Central Michigan that is really crushing their numbers right now. They lost in double overtime to East Carolina. So both of those heartbreakers in the beginning of the year that we probably didn't think much of are really coming back to haunt the Patriots. They also have a loss at Rhode Island. So again, I like the sheer number of wins. I like teams who win games, if you can't tell. And they have a very manageable finishing schedule. So if they get to the finish line with a win out, I think they'll still be sitting there to be potentially looked at for Dayton.
I still can't get over that George Mason logo. I can't shake the Patriots not being in that George Mason logo. As a native Northern Virginian that grew up around the 2006 Final Four run, it shakes me to my core. Andy, any thoughts there on Rocco's first 4 out?
Yeah, Baylor, one thing to call out with them that ultimately is the reason that I think that Rocco had him out. They end up just being, another reason, they end up just being 3 games over 500 realistically, because they played a non-D1 game against Arlington Baptist. So they're really only 15-12. And I think as you look at teams like them and Ohio State, you get into looking at some of these historical precedents, as Rocco hinted at, that whether it's number of road wins or it's number of, record in, where you are related to 500 in meaningful games, whether it's whatever the case may be, you get to 3 games over 500, you're like right there on the edge. And if you project forward, if you don't win the Big 12, obviously there's plenty of games to play, but you lose, your very next game, you get to 2 games over and it's pretty much a done deal. And so Baylor gets difficult because their quality metrics are really good. They rate, I think they're ranked 28th on average across, or they're 27th, which ranks 28th. And so you look at that and that is impressive, but they really are in a bit of a difficult spot just because of playing that non-D1 game. So they're a team that to me is like a pretty wide range of outcomes for. And then Georgia, we touched on earlier, the one true road win is a problem. As Rocco mentioned, it seems like as you look at other projections, they're either a 12 seed or the first 4 out, looking at them. So that Florida win was huge, but need to figure out a way to do things away from home, and huge bubble game at Texas. And then they go at South Carolina. They've got to find a way to win one of those next 2 to really solidify, maybe not solidify, but bolster their case as they look ahead. And, San Francisco and George Mason, I think, are the teams from the non-major leagues that are right there in the mix, both, net in the 60 or worse range. So kind of fringe teams in that way, but certainly ones that have won a lot of games, as Rocco mentioned, that in the next couple weeks and even getting somewhat deep into their respective conference tournaments will end up being probably pretty important for them as well.
Let's take a look here at the consensus first 4 out. You see Ohio State, Xavier, SMU, and North Carolina hanging around the Tar Heels for everything that's happened in Chapel Hill this year. UNC still just hanging around there with a shot to get in. But we've talked about Xavier already. We've talked a lot about SMU. So do you guys have your opinions that you want to talk about with North Carolina and Ohio State?
Yeah, North Carolina 1-8 against the field. Obviously, I think their top 5 games or so were against top 6 or so teams, maybe 8 teams. So I can understand forgiving a lot of those losses. Most teams would not win those games. Their one win they did get was UCLA on a neutral court. And then they've been almost flawless after that. If they were flawless, I might consider them a little more strongly, but they did have the home loss to Stanford, of course. Lost that one late by 1 point. And they're 7-10 in the top 2 quads. I just think in the first quad at 1-10, that's just such a poor winning percentage. It's less than 10% of the time you win in your, in those bigger games. If you go off of a percentage basis, pretty much anybody else on the bubble is going to be better. But the thing you like about North Carolina is the 5th strongest schedule. They always schedule well. They do have 3 wins in the top 2 quads. it's not as good as SMU's. They have Florida State, Notre Dame, and NC State. Those are not great teams, but they're quad 2 teams. But I do like SMU's road wins a little better. And also the overall record away from Chapel Hill at 7-9. And they're 3-6 in those true road games in the top 2 quads with those 3 I listed as the wins. To me, it's just not enough mustard. Now they can get all the mustard they could ever want if they can beat Duke. So I think, and they get that game in the Dean Dome. So I feel like North Carolina is right there as a cliffhanger. I really have a hard time seeing a path for them if they don't win the Duke game.
Okay. Let's kick it now to the next 4 out and see who we have here that's still on the edge. And San Francisco, we've already talked about them, already talked about George Mason, a little bit on Texas and Wake Forest too here. Wake Forest and Texas farther out than you have had them, or at least San Francisco as well, Rocco. Where do you think the difference is here, with these teams being a little farther out maybe than you had them?
Yeah, well, Wake Forest, they're like 7th out for me, so pretty similar with the consensus. Again, those 3 subpar losses, the 2 home losses to Virginia and Florida State, the road loss to NC State, just kind of tilts the scales a little too much for my liking. If they do get a road win at Duke, like pretty impossible to do, but if they get the opportunity, that's all you can ask for in future forecasting. If they pull that off, I think we're all in agreement they're back in. So you have to kind of keep them around based on that. They also still have resume numbers in the 40s. The wins above bubble has them 47. The strength of resume is still 43. In fact, all these ACC teams are strong in those areas. So that's where guys like Bubba Cunningham can make his case in the actual committee room. But I think right now it's just really hard to put them in. So they're pretty far out for me. And then Texas is playing that same, are we anywhere near 500 game when we remove quad 4? And quite frankly, they're 3 games under now after the loss to Arkansas. For me, that was a winner in, loser out game. So Arkansas got in pretty cleanly. Texas fell out. And I think Texas, with their remaining schedule, I've got it right here. They host Georgia tomorrow. Obviously a huge one for both teams. Georgia needs a road win. And then they go to Mississippi State and they finish with a host of Oklahoma. I do think Texas needs to win out from where I'm sitting, unless something happens where a committee member comes out and says they're going to start taking teams well under 500.
Andy, take us home here on this segment. Your thoughts on those last couple of teams there on the outside looking in.
Yeah, just to go back real quick and touch on Ohio State. They're right in that 3 games over 500 overall, let alone where Rocco has them in the kind of minus the Q4 game. So they have those wins away from home against Purdue and Kentucky, which are still impressive. They've only got 2 regular season games left. They've got Nebraska at home, which is pretty much a must win, and then they travel to Indiana. And they don't necessarily, anybody can use more road wins, but that's not as much of a factor for them as it is just straight up winning games at this point. But yeah, as you look at Texas, that game was a crusher against Arkansas to be able to come back, force overtime, but then lose. And now you look at them, and Rocco mentioned their last 3. I'm tend to be in line with him as well. Beating fellow bubble teams at home would certainly be helpful. So maybe winning those games and losing at Mississippi State would be okay. But they've really got some work to do in that regard. And so, yeah, they're on the outside looking in for the way that I would look at it. And Ohio State a little bit further up that grouping. And then Wake, that Duke game just becomes huge. We kind of been saying they just can't drop some of these games. They've proceeded to drop some of these games. And now they've got Notre Dame and Georgia Tech at home that very much fall in that category. But having to pin your hopes on a road win at Cameron against this Duke team is not a great place to be in. But I think that's the position that they put themselves in at this point.
Yeah, and right now they're projected as go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with where Andy's at. In fact, when Ohio State gets a little closer to the numbers, and obviously with 2 games left, I think they got to get them both. But it's a lot easier to put a team in that has a win away from home against Kentucky and a road win at Purdue in versus Texas. I think Texas, no matter what, their best road win is Oklahoma. So I think they absolutely have to win the game at Mississippi State because of that. And then the other two, like you said, Andy, are home bubble games. So that's why, beyond all the record stuff that I always kind of harp on, there's many reasons why they need to win all three of those games.
Okay. All right. Let's take another break. And when we come back, we're going to go deeper on 4 specific resumes that we have to talk about. We'll do all of that when we come back, and then get you out of here with some games to watch over the next 3 days before the next Fielding the 68 on Monday, which is going to be a full bracket reveal. So stay tuned for that. But we'll take a break now. This is Fielding the 68 presented by Rhythm.
If you haven't heard by now, we have partnered with BetMGM for the season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers of the Field of 68. Bet insurance tokens, odds boosts, and what I love, a nice parlay boost or two here or there. Be sure to keep your eye out in the app for the Field of 68 specials that we'll be running throughout the season as well. So go download the BetMGM app to sign up today.
Welcome back to Fielding the 68, presented by Rhythm. Identify mid-majors and underdogs that could upset the field and shake up your bracket. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. All right, fellas, let's get into the final segment of our show today. Paul Fritschner alongside Andy Bottoms and Rocco Miller. And we have a few teams that we're going to talk about here. Instead of going big picture, we're going to zero in on 4 different resumes. And the first one is Arkansas, that we just talked about a little bit in the last segment. Now, they've moved up to a 10 seed. They get that win the other night in the bubble battle, and there's some breathing room here for the Razorbacks. Andy, how much breathing room do you think they have, and where does Arkansas sit in your mind going into the weekend?
Definitely a huge win earlier in the week, but not super safe, I wouldn't say. I think, to me, they're maybe at best the last 10 seed, probably more likely an 11 that's a little bit in that last 4 buys category, but not in outside of the last 4 in, and not heading to Dayton at this point. I think what you like about them is that the resume metrics rank 40th on average, and so you're right in that range where you're in pretty good shape for selection. And the quality metrics are just slightly better than that. They do have 4 quad 1A wins, which is huge and really stands out when you look at a lot of the other bubble teams. So that certainly helps. But at this point, 6-9 against the top 2 quadrants. They are 10-9, so over 500 once you take out the Q4 games. And the other thing that I think you look at with them is their remaining schedule is manageable, I guess, in some ways, as manageable as you can get in the SEC. They travel to South Carolina, so by nature, the easiest road game that you can get in the conference. They do go to Vandy, who's knocked off a lot of the top dogs in the league at home, and then you finish hosting Mississippi State. I think they put themselves in a position. You go 2-1 in that stretch. I think you can feel really good about it. 1-2. Probably sweating a little bit, and anything else, you can probably do the math on where that puts them. But they definitely have gone from a team that in the last couple of weeks has been on the wrong side of the cut line to being outside of Dayton. They've moved up quite a bit over that time period, and I think those top end wins are a big reason why.
Yeah, Rocco, Arkansas, they start the new year here. You flip the calendar, and they go 0-5 in the SEC to start 2025. They're sitting at 11-7, and I think there's a lot of frustration, right? You're thinking to yourself, can this team put anything together? Can they just end the season with some momentum? And now all of a sudden we're talking about Arkansas playing their way into the NCAA tournament. Where do they sit for you? And I know you've already talked about it a little bit, but just more so going into this weekend.
Well, of course, they've got the big road win at Rupp, right? That's big for way more reasons than just the PR. It's huge for their resume. Kentucky's a safe 3 seed right now. From a bracketology standpoint, it's a top 10 road win. They've got the win over Michigan that aged really well for them, and they've beaten a very good Missouri team at home. But they're just 3-9. If you take away the Texas win, I don't have Texas in the field. So right now, the way I see it, they're only 3-9 against tournament teams, which, it's only winning 25% of the time as a totality. Now, they've done enough if the season ended now for me to put them in. And, of course, once they're in, their seed's going to be pretty good because they outperform a lot of the teams they'll be compared with, which is why I think as a consensus we'll have Arkansas as a 10 seed today. But that by no means they're safe for being selected. They're just 10-11 when you remove the quad 4 data. They played 7 quad 4 games, so that's not very helpful. With 3 games to go, as Andy said, they do have a more manageable slate, but they got to go to South Carolina. We just saw Texas get blown out there. They can't let that happen. They'll go to Vanderbilt, who's a really, really good home team. And then, of course, they finish with the home game. So I still think they got to get 2 of those 3. If they go 1 and 2, they're not dead, but it's going to be pretty dicey heading into championship week. I think one of the other things that we didn't say yet that is really important to this whole bubble discussion is the fact that none of us have projected any bid steals. And the reality is we're probably going to end up with 2 or 3. We might end up with as many as 5 like last year. And, quite honestly, that's how the bubble gets stronger is when bids get stolen. We just don't know if it's going to be. We've seen years with 0, but most of the time there's at least 2. So, once those bids get gobbled up, it's going to be tougher and tougher for teams with poor records to get in.
Sure. Okay, Purdue. So we talk about Arkansas, who's been coming on stronger lately, but Purdue on the flip side, they've lost 4 straight. The context there, though, is that 3 of those 4 have been on the road. They lost at Michigan State, and at Indiana. The one sandwiched in there at home was a 10-point loss to Wisconsin, but albeit the same, they've lost 4 in a row. They now sit at 19-9 on the season. They're 11-6 in the Big Ten. They're 17th on KenPom. Purdue has slid to the 5 line, Andy. That loss to Indiana, Purdue's just, it's a tough stretch for them. Do you see them sliding further and further down, or do you feel like this is a team that can right the ship?
I think they can right the ship. They've had, as you said, some tough games since then. And so they haven't won since the reveal. Obviously not good. They're 0-3 since that came out. But they still have 7 quad 1 wins, 3 of those in quad 1A. Their average quality metrics rank 15th. Their average resume metrics rank 15th. So they're kind of right around in that 4 or 5 range. And so they got a chance tonight. UCLA comes to town, would be another good win, chance to right the ship. They play Rutgers at home. That won't be an easy game by any means with the way that if Rutgers can get up off the mat after the way the game ended last night at Michigan. And then they finish at Illinois, who's been pretty up and down. So I think they've got chances to right the ship. The overall metrics, there's always teams each year that kind of test it's the full body of work and trying not to get too caught up in how they've played more recently when those recent games don't count any more than a game that took place months ago. And Purdue did a lot of great work in the non-conference, and I think that's important to remember. I don't feel great being the IU guy on here having to defend Purdue by any stretch. I would much rather dance on their grave, as it were. But I think they've done enough at this point, full body of work, to not feel too bad. So I think you look at them. I think if they lose tonight at home to UCLA in a game where backs against the wall a little bit and being able to do that, I think then you start to worry a little bit more of like what could happen after that. But I think if they're able to take care of business at Mackey, which I'm sure we'll be fired up for that one, I think they can steady things a little bit and still stick around in that potential 4 seed range.
All right, we'll take you out of the Hoosier State here. We don't have to make you talk about Purdue anymore. We'll take you to Kansas, who now is slid, or not slid, but they stay at the 6 line. They have 3 games remaining that are all quad 1A games. How high can they jump, Andy?
It's funny the way that they had fallen off. They get the chance to stop the bleeding at Colorado earlier in the week, and then now you look at this gauntlet that they have down the stretch with Texas Tech coming into Fog Allen. they go to Houston, and then they host Arizona. So the good news is, if you want to be the positive side of where things can go, that'd get you up to, obviously teams can move around. That would get you up to 7 quad 1 wins, 6 of those in quad 1A. Again, things can move. The quality metrics are still pretty good for Kansas. They're on average, rank 18th there, 26th in the resume metrics. You win those games, that really pushes you up the field there. So if there are 6 today, you win those games, things can change quickly. You get back into protected seed range. But it's hard to look at Kansas that way with how badly everybody felt about them going into even the game at Colorado. So I think at best you push yourself up into the 4, maybe a 3 range if everything goes absolutely right around you. But I think a lot of folks who follow Kansas are probably looking at it a little bit more of the what happens if they lose all these games type range based on how they had been playing more recently and whether they can fall. So a lot of great opportunities, which is what you want at this time of year. But that opportunity is also one that can push you the other direction if things don't go well.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to ask you, Rocco. Where is that direction headed for Kansas in your mind?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a wait and see. I thought just going up to Colorado and proving they could win a game in altitude after the way the Utah-BYU trip went, where they lost both, that was a positive step for the program, probably for the confidence level. So we'll see how they come out in the home game with Texas Tech. But yeah, I think even though it's a daunting 3 games, 2 of those games are at the Fog, and year in and year out, that's one of the hardest places for anybody to play, no matter how good Kansas is. So even if it is one of their not so great teams this year, they're still going to have a rocking Fog for those 2 games against Texas Tech and Arizona. Going to Houston's just a bonus opportunity, shooting for the moon. And so, yeah, like Kansas, they might be okay. That Colorado game was a get-right opportunity. They got right. And I'll tell you this, if they do win some of these games, 2 of these 3 or even 1 of these 3, and they're in some tight comparisons to move up to a 5 or move up to a 4, chances are, and history tells us, the committee tends to give the benefit of the doubt to the blue blood, and they've always got that going for them.
Last team to talk about here, and I know I'm a little biased as a Big East guy, that St. John's now has found themselves in a position where tomorrow they're going to play for the outright Big East title for the first time in forever. Rick Pitino has this team moving. In my mind, this is a team that will compete for the Final Four this year. I know they don't shoot the ball particularly well, but the way that this team can defend feels like their ceiling is incredibly high. They sit at the 3 line right now. Rocco, can they get up to the 2 line with what they have left?
I think so, because the road game at Marquette represents a needle mover. I think the other thing wrong with only things you can really pick apart on St. John's, Paul, is they're 3 and 4 in quad 1. You would at least want to get to 500, especially to be a 2 seed. The teams they're being compared with, like Michigan State's 9 and 4, Wisconsin 7 and 5, even Kentucky's 9 and 8, which is obviously a lot more losses, but Kentucky's carrying a ton of lumber in their bag, with wins over Duke, Gonzaga, Tennessee, Mississippi State on the road. So St. John's, the things that benefit them the most when it comes to seeding are the fact that they only have 4 losses. A lot of those games are meaningful wins, 20 and 4 in the meaningful games, winning road records. So really, they just got to fix the quad 1. They can do that slightly with the win at Marquette. That would also add an 8th win against the board, which is a good amount of wins. And I think at that point, enough teams, like if Wisconsin falls once or twice, Kentucky falls once or twice, both very reasonable to see happen. St. John's would be the logical 2. Here's what I'd like to say, though, overall. Would you rather – because today St. John's, because they were 10th overall on my seed list, they were the nice, clean 3 seed in the East, going to Providence and going to Newark. If you're a St. John's fan, Paul, if I give you that right now, would you take it? Or do you want to take this 2 seed and get shipped to like the Midwest or the West?
Yeah, I think that's a no-brainer. That's a great point. And it's something I was listening to somebody else today talk about the same thing, that if you can get that geography and you can play down the road twice.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're not getting the East.
So,
if they get a 2 seed, they're not getting the East. So that's my point.
Yeah, so if you can do that, yeah, play in front of your home fans.
because
Andy.
the 2 seed in the East is going to go to an SEC team. So you might be okay just losing that Marquette game and sitting where you're at.
Andy, to wrap up there, anything, whether it's St. John's, Kansas, anything more on any of these teams that we've just talked about?
Yeah, St. John's, the only thing I'd add is if they do win that Marquette game, we talk so much about road wins, they'd be 8-2 in true road games with that. And the challenge with them, as Rocco mentioned, is they just haven't had the same number of opportunities. And so they sit, the easy knock on them is exactly what he said. They're 3-4 in quad one games. Well, that just becomes difficult to compare to some of these other teams. And maybe, as he mentioned, the end result for them that is the best is to stay on the 3 line no matter whether they win these games or not. And so that probably from a long-term view is maybe the better outcome for them. But I think you got to start to look at some point of having only 4 losses, winning the Big East potentially by multiple games as you go forward, depending upon how things play out. Maybe that is enough to push them up, but I think they're kind of in that 3 range right now and might be the best thing for them overall, and not a whole lot they can do about it. But metrics wise, the resume metrics average, 10th ranked, the quality metrics ranked 14th as you look at it that way. So they're kind of right in that sweet spot of the three range right now. And the Marquette win could help that, the Seton Hall win. It's avoid disaster tomorrow and play well there and kind of move on.
Time to wrap this show up the only way we know how. What we are watching this weekend. What do we keep an eye on? What should you be paying attention to over the next 3 days? Obviously, so much going on. I would say the last weekend of the regular season, but the ASUN tournament starts on Sunday. Conference tournaments are already getting going here in 48 hours. We'll have March Madness, conference tournaments kicking into gear. So for most teams, this is the last full weekend of the regular season. A lot of the mid-major conferences wrapping up their regular seasons this weekend. What are we looking at, fellas?
Yeah, so I'll start. Gonzaga at San Francisco, Chase Center tomorrow. Winner gets the 2 seed and a bye to the semifinals. If Gonzaga loses, it'll be the first time ever that they didn't get that bye. Almost always as a 1 seed, by the way. So that'll be big around here. Obviously, on the bubble, you have Georgia at Texas. Georgia really, really, really needs the road win. Texas needs to win out. That's pretty massive. Arkansas, as unsexy as it might look, has a really important game at South Carolina that we just covered. SMU, if they're going to keep making the case, they got to keep winning these awkward road games way far away from home. They're here at Stanford tomorrow. On the top of the board, we talked about Florida getting a chance to bounce back, hosting Texas A&M. Texas A&M also looking for a bounce back after the loss to Vanderbilt. And then, of course, Alabama at Tennessee. So 2 of our top 5 finally going to go head-to-head. And, of course, Alabama next week will play Florida at home. So if Alabama's going to be a 1 seed, we're going to find out what they're made of in these next 2 games.
Andy, what are you watching?
If you look on, I'll throw a couple for Friday and Sunday, where the Big Ten is the one of the only major conference teams that has games. UCLA Purdue, we talked about that a bit tonight. A big game for Purdue and UCLA kind of floating in that 5 to 7-ish seed range, and so seeing where they might shake out of that. Sunday, big one there. Wisconsin at Michigan State. Michigan State has rocketed up the board. Another chance at a really good win there. Illinois at Michigan. Illinois stopped the bleeding against Iowa the other day, but a chance to get a win at Michigan in what can, I think, only be a close game by law at this point with the Wolverines. And then as you look on Saturday, a couple of games that Rocco did not mention, Missouri at Vanderbilt, an interesting one. Missouri kind of has crept up in a lot of places. I'm kind of reading the tea leaves here. If Purdue's a 5, I'm guessing that the consensus of everybody has Missouri as a 4. So a chance to get a big road win to solidify that against, going to Vandy, who has, as I mentioned earlier, knocked off a lot of the top teams there this year. We talked a little bit about Iowa State. Again, kind of can they right the ship by hosting when they host Arizona? Kansas, we talked about they host Texas Tech. And then on the bubble, mentioned this briefly when we were talking about Xavier. Creighton at Xavier, a huge one for the Musketeers to be able to kind of stay in it. And then you've got Oklahoma at Ole Miss, a big game for the Sooners to be able to try to get another road win and be able to do things there. if you really want a team who really needs a win in a completely probably bleak spot, I would throw out the Bearcats of Cincinnati because they got that win against Baylor to kind of hang around the other day, and their reward for that is a trip to Houston. So I wish them luck as they move into that, but certainly one that would move the needle if they could do it. But when they almost have to have it at this point, based on where they are.
The interesting thing about that game, Cincinnati and Houston, and I know Cincinnati's a 15.5-point underdog going down to Houston, but if you look at Houston's schedule, you're coming off that Iowa State and Texas Tech swing. You have Kansas and Baylor coming up, and you have Cincinnati sandwiched in the middle there. The only thing you can think of, and I had Rob Doster on my podcast earlier this week to talk about this, is maybe the only thing you can think of if you're a Cincinnati fan looking at that as a 15.5-point underdog is maybe Houston says we can roll Cincinnati and the Bearcats can catch a break here or there. But that's one that would really move the needle for UC if they could win that.
For sure.
All right.
I think it's Cincinnati wins that game, Paul. I mean, that's how crazy bad the bubble is. I think they would go right into the bracket on Monday. But that's their only chance to go in because they don't have another game like that the rest of the way.
All right, I will be at the Cintas Center tomorrow for Xavier and Creighton. If you're going to the Chase Center tomorrow, Rocco Miller will stand after the game and wait and do pictures and autographs for as long as the line is willing to wait for him, right?
Absolutely, yes. Come to WCC territory. We have great basketball out here. Can't wait to put it on for the world to see. Stay up late if you're on the East Coast. It's going to be a great game.
Bonus points if you bring a blank sheet of paper with a bracket on it. He'll sign it. He'll pre-sign it, and that'll be worth something in a couple of weeks. You can fill that out. Andy, you going anywhere this weekend?
Actually, go to a high school game tomorrow. The school that my daughter goes to, their boys team has advanced, so I'll be there, and then home in time to watch IU at Washington on Peacock, and then do a post-game show for that. So that's the excitement for me, and then I probably will be up watching the game that Rocco will be at for sure, and we'll be following the Xavier game from the Dayton area, I believe, is where I'm headed. So that's what I got going this week.
Absolutely. All right, fellas. Well, this has been another great show of Fielding the 68 presented by Rhythm. That's Andy Bottoms. That's Rocco Miller. I'm Paul Fritschner signing off. Make sure you go check out the Field of 68's social channels for the full bracket that'll be posted here in just a minute. And then again on Monday, we will do a full bracket reveal here on 5 o'clock on Monday, on Fielding the 68, where you can check out everything that you need to know heading into this important week of the regular season next week. All right. Have a great weekend.